From the absolute banger of a fight between Sterling and Cejudo to the fans' disappointment at a last-minute fight cut, here are the absolute best and worst moments of UFC 288. Well, UFC 288 most definitely won with its title card. Many fans were worried about how good the cards would be. After all, the event's been surrounded by controversy from the get-go, with countless fight changes, and one card being entirely dropped due to injuries, to the point where it looked like there might just be a curse on UFC 288. The success of the entire event seemed to hinge on the entertainment factor that Sterling versus Cejudo would give to countless fight fans across the world. The bantamweight title fight ended up being one for the ages, a fiercely contested fight that honestly could have gone either way, but ultimately went to Sterling by a split decision win. The two fighters went back and forth for 5 whole rounds, with 3 rounds going to Sterling and 2 going to Cejudo, confirming the reigning champion's title retention and causing the crowd to go wild. Sterling is now in the best position of his whole career. With his 3rd title defense, he's an undisputed king of the bantamweight division and has nowhere to go but up. The champion can fight whoever he wants and whenever he wants. The sky's the limit. Even his opponent was full of praises for him, outright calling him one of the best to ever do it. Talk about some mad respect. At this point, it might not even be that far off the mark. Defending a belt 3 times is no easy task. Few in the history of the fighting game have ever done it, and after this fight, Sterling might seriously need to be considered in the GOAT conversation. Fans were even treated to one of the greatest callouts in UFC history when the number 2 contender, Sean O'Malley, decided to jump into the ring to get right in Sterling's face. Facing the reigning champion, he challenged him directly, telling him he would have to be much better than he is right now in order to keep the belt out of O'Malley's hands. Things in the octagon started to get a little heated from there when both teams' entourages started jawing off at each other. It's always amazing when a card sets up a future brawl like that, and they managed to do it in the most entertaining way possible. But what does the future hold for the loser? No one can deny that Cejudo fought bravely. The match really could have gone either way, but in the end, only one person can lift the belt, and the fates were not smiling on him that day. The 36-year-old gave the performance of his life, but what's next for him? When asked about his plans for the future, the 2-time champion and former gold medalist seemed uncharacteristically unsure of himself, admitting that he didn't really know where he would go from here, but that there was always the possibility that he would come back to the octagon. For the time being, however, that chance seems pretty slim, and he might want to spend some quality time with his family. Regardless, his fans could not have been happy seeing this loss. But this wasn't the only match on this card that fans were waiting for with bated breath. Bilal and Burns were hyped to be one of the greatest fights in recent history. Honestly, there was a lot of pressure on UFC 288 to deliver on its co-card, the clash of Muhammad Bilal and Gilbert Burns. Sure, the fight was relatively short notice for both fighters, with both only having a couple of weeks to prepare. But that short length of time was enough for the two fighters to generate an insane amount of hype. The lead-up to the fight was packed with trash talk, with both fighters throwing heaps of trash talk at one another. And why wouldn't they? After all, both fighters were gunning for that most coveted of fight rewards, a title shot at their division belt. That's right, whoever won this fight was going to have a sure shot to fight for the belt. So to say the stakes were high is a massive understatement, but to say the fight delivered for fans might not be completely true though. Sure, any title shot fight is fun to watch, simply because it's by definition exciting and going to pave the way for a much bigger fight down the road. But that might have been all that the fight really had going for it. In fact, it wouldn't be too far off the mark to say that the fight was downright boring past the first round, devolving into a careful stand-up tussle rather than the exciting striking and grappling extravaganza that fans were promised. You'll notice I said the first round was pretty good, with a couple pretty cool body kicks from Bilal. So what happened? Well, there lies the tragedy of Gilbert Burns, who seemed to be nursing his shoulder throughout the last 4 rounds. Basically, it seems like he sustained a shoulder injury during a takedown attempt on Burns, and that ended the match for him and led to some pretty bored fans. Even other UFC fighters expressed their displeasure for the match on Twitter, with the famous Conor McGregor straight up calling it a very poor bout. Belal sure had the night of his life though. Honestly, not a lot of people were expecting Belal to beat Burns, but his methodical style most definitely proved them wrong, just as he said it would during those early days of Fight Hype. The win extends the fighter's already impressive winning streak that's been going since 2019, the longest current win streak in the division. No wonder the guy thinks he's the best undisputed bantamweight in the world right now. In fact, he might just consider himself one of the best ever, and his record seems to pretty much agree with that. The fighter had just 8 weeks to prepare for the fight, and had just come out of a month of fasting, meaning he'd spent a month of basically no training. More than that, this win silenced the haters, who were pointing at the fact that Belal hadn't fought for quite some time, to discount his skills as a fighter and declare Burns as the obvious winner. Now, Muhammad has a title shot lined up for him, something that Daniel Cormier thinks he very much deserves. Naturally, his opponent isn't happy at all. Everyone thought that Gilbert Burns was a sure shot to win his UFC 288 fight. He'd been on an absolute tear through his division, beating opponent after opponent and taking fight after fight in quick succession, all with his eyes fixed on the goal of getting a title shot. It was supposed to be a story for the ages, and Burns went into the fight with the mindset that he was going to win it all.
Muhammad talks a lot.
He's moving fine, and
They want more pressure.
the exchanges. Gilbert looked a little, I think it was hard to sell. It was something that they both understood.
He made it clear through pre-fight trash talk that he didn't really think much of Belal and his skills, and even ridiculed him for not taking any fights recently. Ultimately, luck proved to be the villain of the story, courtesy of the bad shoulder I just told you guys about. Imagine spending day after day breaking your body for a single goal and having it all be taken away from you because you landed on your arm wrong. Even worse, there's a very real possibility that the shoulder could be a much bigger problem down the line, since such injuries can end up completely grinding a fighter's career to a halt. Even if his arm heals, he might never be able to use it the same way again, potentially ending his career. Clearly, this was a night for disappointments, and what could be a bigger disappointment of having a fight be dropped off the card at the last second? Look, sometimes things are out of a sports organization's control. After all, it's not like they can plan for every possibility, right? Well, the UFC sure couldn't. With the cancellation of the fight between Estevam and Zmagulov, there's few things more annoying to fans than getting hyped for a fight, paying for the ticket or pay-per-view, and ending up not being able to see their favorite fights play out in front of them. It's downright infuriating, honestly. Basically, the scoop is that the fight was cut because Estevam wasn't able to make weight, since he never made it to the pre-fight weighing session. This isn't the most uncommon thing in the history of the UFC. Cutting weight is hard, with fighters having to go through grueling regimens and having to deal with the drastic and sudden changes to their bodies. At the same time, fans do expect them to be able to meet certain expectations. No one likes having to watch a replacement fight that they never prepared to see in the first place, devoid of any of the build-up or hype. Well, folks, there you have it. From the fans' disappointment at a last-minute fight cut to the absolute banger of a fight that was Sterling and Cejudo, these were the absolute best and worst moments of UFC 288.